You probably heard about the trade war between Trump and Canada and thought this was just another round of political posturing, another tariff threat, another angry press conference. But if that's all you saw, you missed what's actually happening here. Because this isn't just about tariffs or tough talk between leaders. What we're watching is the deliberate exposure of a fragile economic system that was built to look efficient only as long as nobody ever challenged it. And when Canada did challenge it, the entire structure started to crack. The tariff war that changed everything. It started in February 2025 when President Trump threatened 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, claiming Canada was a weak link in border security and drug enforcement. The justification was that fentanyl and illegal crossings were pouring through the northern border, even though less than 1% of fentanyl entering the United States actually comes from Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tried to defuse the situation by announcing a $1.3 billion border security investment, but it wasn't enough. Within weeks, Trudeau resigned under pressure, and Mark Carney, the former Bank of England governor and Bank of Canada governor, won a snap election in April 2025. He inherited a trade war that was about to get much worse. Trump didn't back down. By July 2025, he escalated tariffs to 35% on Canadian imports, specifically targeting the auto industry and manufacturing sectors that are deeply integrated with American supply chains. This wasn't a negotiation tactic anymore. This was economic warfare, and Carney's response revealed something that shocked corporate America. Canada wasn't going to play defense. Canada's strategic retaliation. On February 1st, 2025, Canada announced $155 billion in counter tariffs on American goods, the largest retaliatory package in Canadian history. The first phase targeted $30 billion worth of U.S. products, including orange juice, peanut butter, wine, beer, coffee, appliances, motorcycles, and cosmetics, with tariffs set at 25%. The second phase, worth $125 billion, included passenger vehicles, steel, aluminum, aerospace products, beef, pork, dairy, and recreational vehicles. But tariffs were only part of the strategy. What came next was far more disruptive. In January 2025, Canada deployed Black Hawk helicopters for aerial border patrols, a highly visible show of enforcement capacity. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police announced they were strengthening monitoring along the Alberta-US border and other key crossing points. Canada also hired 1,000 new border officers with a mandate not just to process trucks faster, but to enforce compliance more rigorously. The message was clear. If the United States wanted to treat Canada as a security threat, Canada would demonstrate exactly what real border enforcement looks like. Then, on March 27, 2025, Carney gave a speech that fundamentally altered the relationship between the two countries. Standing in Ottawa after consultations with provincial premiers, he declared, "It is clear that the United States is no longer a reliable partner." He went further. "The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over." This wasn't diplomatic language. This was a rupture. The just-in-time vulnerability exposed. Here's what most people don't understand about modern trade. The system isn't designed to survive friction. It's designed to survive speed. North American supply chains operate on a principle called just-in-time manufacturing, where parts and goods arrive exactly when they're needed, often within hours. Auto plants don't stockpile weeks of components. Grocery distributors don't warehouse months of produce. Everything is timed, sequenced, and synchronized to minimize inventory costs and maximize profit margins. Because carrying inventory costs money, and in a hyper-competitive global economy, every dollar spent on storage is a dollar lost to shareholders. When you introduce delays into that system, even briefly, the entire structure collapses. And this is exactly what started happening at the Canadian border. In early October 2025, the Canada Border Services Agency experienced a massive IT system outage that lasted over 48 hours. Truckers were stranded for up to 36 hours at crossing points from New York to Ontario and Michigan to Ontario. Commercial wait times spiked to 38 hours in certain regions. The chaos wasn't just an inconvenience, It was a demonstration of how brittle the system really is. Stephen Laskowski, president and CEO of the Canadian Trucking Alliance, said the timing couldn't be worse, noting that these disruptions hit the automotive sector particularly hard because of its reliance on just-in-time delivery. When the CBSA's systems went down, border officers couldn't access security alerts or background checks on incoming cargo. Mark Webber, national president of the Customs and Immigration Union, admitted that by the time the system came back online, trucks had already entered Canada without proper screening. The vulnerability was exposed on both sides. The economic system couldn't handle delays, and the security system couldn't function without technology. Who really pays the price? Notice something important here. When borders slow down, it's not executives who wait in traffic. It's not investors who miss deliveries. It's not CEOs who explain shortages to customers. Those experiences belong to workers. Truck drivers sat unpaid in their cabs for 36 hours during the October outage. Warehouse workers faced reduced shifts when shipments didn't arrive. Grocery store clerks dealt with frustrated customers asking why shelves were empty, and consumers absorbed price increases that were framed as temporary but rarely reversed. This is the pattern that always repeats. Capital externalizes risk downward by design. When systems fail, the costs are pushed onto the least powerful participants first. Corporations hedge against disruption through diversified portfolios and financial instruments. Workers absorb disruption directly through lost wages and job insecurity. The language used reveals this hierarchy. When corporations face delays, the term used is disruption, framed as an external shock beyond anyone's control. When workers face delays, the term used is inefficiency, framed as a personal or operational failure. One logistics operator in Windsor, Ontario, whose fleet crosses the border 60 times daily, explained that IT outages delay operations for days and require extra hours to complete the same tasks. That translates directly into higher costs that either get passed to consumers or absorbed by cutting labor hours. Either way, workers and ordinary people pay. And this isn't an accident of the system. It's how the system preserves profitability at the top. The border as economic weapon. Here's what makes Carney's approach so significant. Tariffs target prices, but border enforcement targets flow, and flow disruptions are far more destabilizing than price increases. When a tariff raises the cost of orange juice by 25%, consumers adjust or substitute. But when border inspections slow the movement of auto parts by even a few hours, entire assembly lines shut down because there's no inventory buffer. Production stops, workers get sent home, contracts get breached, the costs cascade instantly. Canada demonstrated something that corporate America had forgotten. Access to markets is conditional, not guaranteed. For decades, borders were redesigned to serve corporate logistics efficiency. Government agencies were evaluated not on enforcement quality but on processing speed. Border officers became facilitators of trade rather than regulators of it. Performance metrics measured throughput, not compliance. The entire institutional framework was optimized for one goal: move goods faster. Corporations built their profit models on this assumption. They assumed inspections would remain minimal, automated, and cursory. They assumed political cooperation would be permanent. They assumed trust between governments would never break down. Stock prices quietly embedded these assumptions. Supply chain contracts locked them in. And when those assumptions proved false, there was no plan B. Carney understood this vulnerability. By increasing visible enforcement, deploying helicopters, hiring more officers, and framing these measures as sovereignty rather than retaliation, he forced a confrontation between rhetoric and reality. Trump could promise toughness on television, but when toughness took the form of inspection, verification, and delay, the costs became immediate and visible, and those costs revealed dependency. The bigger picture: trade's hidden architecture. For decades, we were told that trade was frictionless because it was natural, efficient, and inevitable. But trade was never frictionless by nature. It was frictionless by design. Governments deliberately chose to remove inspections, reduce staffing, automate approvals, and fast-track cargo flows because corporate lobbies demanded it. They wanted borders that behaved like toll booths permanently stuck on green. That design choice had consequences. It made corporations more profitable, but it also made the entire system dependent on political calm. The moment conflict re-entered the equation, the infrastructure revealed its weakness. You can't instantly reinsert human inspection capacity into a system that spent decades eliminating it. You can't suddenly demand security without slowing everything down. This is why the Canadian response matters. It's not just a policy reaction, it's a demonstration. By instructing border agents to do what border agents were originally created to do, inspect goods, verify compliance, and physically check cargo, the government showed how much of modern trade depends on trust rather than enforcement, and trust, once politicized, evaporates fast. The use of visible enforcement, patrols, personnel increases, and procedural rigor sends a signal not only to Washington but to markets. It says that access is conditional, that speed is not guaranteed, that trade routes are privileges shaped by policy, not immutable rights. This is deeply unsettling to corporations because it exposes a truth they prefer to keep invisible. Their power depends on predictability. Investors assume that parts cross borders smoothly, that trucks move overnight, that inputs arrive on schedule. When that predictability is disrupted, even briefly, risk calculations change. What happens next? Carney has made it clear that Canada will not return to the old relationship. In his March 2025 speech, he said Canada must fundamentally reimagine our economy and dramatically reduce our reliance on the United States. He announced plans to visit France and the United Kingdom to strengthen alliances and explore alternative trade partnerships, calling them long-standing and reliable partners, friends, and allies. The contrast with the United States was deliberate. He vowed that Canada would respond forcefully to any trade aggression and declared, "Nothing is off the table to defend our workers and our country." Trump and Carney have agreed to comprehensive negotiations, but the trust that underpinned decades of integration is gone. Carney acknowledged that with comprehensive negotiations, we could reestablish an element of confidence, but he added, there will be no going backwards. That's a recognition that the system has fundamentally changed. Corporations are now lobbying for exemptions, trusted trader programs, and private compliance regimes that would allow them to bypass public enforcement. In other words, they're seeking to escape oversight rather than adapt to it. This is the familiar cycle. Public authority creates friction. Private power lobbies to bypass it. Governments compromise. The system returns to speed, slightly more opaque than before. But each cycle erodes public capacity a little more. Each cycle makes the system more fragile, and each cycle ensures that the next disruption will be even more catastrophic. The lesson: nobody wants you to learn. As you watch this unfold, don't just ask who blinked or who looks tough. Ask why an economy this large can't tolerate inspection. Ask who designed it that way, and ask who benefits from keeping it fragile. Because once you see that pattern here, you'll start noticing it everywhere, in labor law, environmental regulation, housing policy, and healthcare systems. The same logic repeats. Remove friction for capital, introduce friction for everyone else. The border gridlock, the helicopter patrols, the IT outages, and the political rupture between Carney and Trump are not separate incidents. They're all symptoms of the same underlying reality. Systems optimized purely for profit cannot handle political conflict. When leaders posture, it's workers who wait unpaid. When supply chains freeze, it's families who face higher prices and shortages. When systems designed for speed are stressed, it's social stability that cracks first. Carney's border power play exposed something that was always there but carefully hidden. The just-in-time economy is a gamble. It assumed permanent cooperation, low political conflict, and endless trust between governments whose interests don't always align. That assumption worked as long as power was exercised quietly. The moment it became loud, the gamble was exposed, and now everyone is scrambling to figure out what comes next. If you want to understand how power really works in the North American economy, this is the moment to pay attention, because the cracks are showing and they're not going away.